There is a moment that happens in every room, a meeting, a dinner table, a negotiation. Someone talks too much. Someone explains too much. Someone tries too hard to be heard. And then there's one person who barely speaks, yet somehow, everyone keeps glancing at them, not because they are shy, not because they are weak, but because their silence feels heavy. Here's the truth: most people never learn. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful one. Power does not announce itself. Power watches. And once you understand this, you'll never see silence the same way again. This video is not about being introverted. It's not about confidence tricks. And it's definitely not about staying quiet out of fear. This is about control. Psychological control, the kind Machiavelli understood centuries ago, and the kind still shaping rooms today, while most people remain unaware. Because while everyone is busy trying to sound important, the silent ones are deciding the outcome. Imagine this. You are sitting in a room with 5 people. One dominates the conversation. Another keeps interrupting. Someone is constantly explaining themselves. And then there's one person who says almost nothing. They do not rush to speak. They do not react emotionally. They listen. When they finally look up, something shifts. The energy tightens. The room adjusts, not consciously, instinctively, because your brain does not interpret silence as emptiness. It interprets silence as unknown, and humans are deeply uncomfortable with what they can't read. Here's something most people do not want to admit. Your mind is trained to obey silence, not confidence. Confidence can be performed. Words can be rehearsed. Volume can be faked. Silence cannot. When someone speaks, you analyze their words. When someone stays silent, you analyze yourself. You start wondering what they are thinking, whether they disagree, whether they know something you do not, and without realizing it, you begin to adjust. You explain more. You justify yourself. You give away information. That's how power quietly moves from one person to another. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology gave it a name. True power does not display itself. It lets others feel it. Silence creates pressure, not because it is aggressive, but because it leaves space. And humans hate empty space. If you have ever noticed that the more you talk, the less seriously you are taken. If you have ever felt ignored despite explaining yourself clearly. If you have ever sensed that authority slips the moment you start proving your worth. This is not because you lack intelligence. It is because you've been playing the wrong game. You have been trying to win with noise in a world that respects restraint. But here's the dangerous misunderstanding. Silence, by itself, is not power. Used incorrectly, silence makes you invisible. Used emotionally, it makes you weak. Used without awareness, it destroys authority. The difference between weak silence and controlling silence comes down to one brutal rule. And once you understand that rule, you will never be the first person to speak again. Silence only becomes power when it creates pressure, and pressure doesn't come from saying nothing. It comes from not relieving tension. Most people think silence is passive. It is not. Silence is active restraint. When a moment feels unfinished, the human mind panics. It wants closure. It wants certainty, and if you do not provide it, people try to create it themselves. This is where control begins. Rule 1: silence creates psychological pressure. The moment you stop filling space with words, tension appears, not outside, Inside the other person, their mind starts working for you. They replay what they just said. They question their tone. They wonder if they revealed too much. Because silence doesn't accuse. It suggests judgment without confirming it. It suggests authority without proving it. And that ambiguity is uncomfortable. Humans are wired to reduce discomfort, so they talk, they explain, they justify, they correct themselves. You do not need to ask a question. Your silence already did. This is why interrogations do not rely on aggression. They rely on pauses. A question is asked. An answer is given. Asterisk, and then nothing. That empty space feels unbearable, so the person keeps talking. Not because they're forced to, but because silence makes them feel exposed. Here's the part most people miss. The first person to break silence loses leverage, not because they spoke, but because they relieved pressure. The moment you speak too quickly, you release tension that was working in your favor. Silence forces the other person to sit with their own thoughts, and most people do not like what surfaces there. They project, they assume, they reveal, you stay quiet, and suddenly they're negotiating against themselves. This works in meetings, in disagreements, in social settings. When you respond instantly, you appear predictable. When you pause, you appear deliberate, and deliberate people are treated carefully. Notice how authority figures don't rush. Judges pause before speaking. Leaders delay reactions. Power waits, because waiting signals control. Silence communicates. One thing very clearly: I'm not reacting emotionally. I'm choosing my response. That alone shifts the balance. But there's a mistake many people make right here. They stay silent at the wrong moment. And instead of creating pressure, they create confusion or weakness. Because silence is only effective when timed correctly. Used too early, it feels awkward. Used too late, it feels defensive. Timing is what turns silence into authority, and that's where most people fail without realizing it. Because when you pause matters more than how long you pause, and once you understand that, you stop giving away power for free. Silence only works when it arrives at the right moment. Stay quiet too early, and people assume you are unsure. Stay quiet too late, and people think you are retreating. Power lives in timing. Most people speak as soon as they are given space. They rush to fill the gap. They rush to prove presence. That urgency betrays something. It signals need, and need weakens. Authority, rule 2, timing turns silence into authority. Most powerful silence comes after someone speaks, not before you do. When someone finishes a statement, your pause becomes a mirror. They replay their words inside their own head. They second-guess their tone. They wonder how you interpreted it. That pause feels like judgment, not because you are judging them, but because they do not know whether you are, and uncertainty shifts control toward you. This is why experienced negotiators never respond immediately. They let the offer sit. They let the silence stretch, because every second of quiet forces the other person to reconsider their position. Sometimes they add conditions. Sometimes they lower expectations. Sometimes they expose motivation. All because you waited. Now compare that to silence before. Speaking, silence before you respond can feel powerful, but only if your body language supports it. If your posture is unstable. If your eyes avoid contact. If your presence shrinks. That silence does not feel strategic. It feels hesitant. Powerful silence is still. It does not fidget. It does not search for approval. It does not rush to explain. It waits as if it has time, because time implies advantage. Think about how people with nothing to lose behave. They rush. They push. They overtalk. People with leverage do not. They pause. They let the moment breathe. Another critical detail most people miss. Never break silence to defend yourself. Defense hands control to the other person. The moment you justify, you accept their frame. Silence at the right moment rejects the frame entirely. It says, I don't need to correct this. And that message lands harder than words, but timing alone is not. Enough silence only works if people are watching you, and whether they watch or ignore you depends on something far more subtle than speech, because silence does not disappear. It draws attention if you know how to hold it, and that's what separates silent observers from silent authorities. Silence does not make you invisible. Weak presence does. Most people assume that if they stop talking, they will disappear. That attention only comes from volume. That belief is wrong. Silence does not erase you. It magnifies whatever presence you already have. And that's why some quiet people are ignored, while others dominate the room without speaking. Rule 3. Silent people are observed. Attention is wired to scan for uncertainty. We notice what we cannot immediately categorize. Loud people explain themselves. Predictable people reveal their intentions. Silent people leave space, and space forces observation. When someone stays quiet but composed, the brain flags them, not as harmless, but as unreadable. Unreadable people are treated carefully, because the mind assumes they might have leverage. But this only works if your silence is supported by presence. Presence is not confidence tricks. It's not posture drills. It is stillness. Asterisk, stillness signals control. Every unnecessary movement weakens silence. Fidgeting leaks anxiety. Shifting eyes leak discomfort. Strong silence is calm and contained. It does not lean in. It does not shrink back. It stays exactly where it is. Eye contact matters, here, but not in an aggressive way. You are not staring to dominate. You are holding gaze as if you have nothing to prove. That alone communicates status, because high-status people do not chase reactions. They let reactions come to them. This is why the quiet person in the room often becomes the reference point. People watch how they react before deciding how they should react, not because that person spoke, but because they did not. Asterisk. Their silence becomes a signal, but there's a danger. Here, silence without awareness can backfire, because there's a difference between strategic silence and emotional silence. One commands respect, the other invites dismissal, and most people confuse the two. They think staying quiet automatically makes them powerful. It does not. Sometimes silence is not control. Sometimes it is fear wearing discipline as a disguise. And if you do not understand that difference, silence will work against you, because power never comes from withdrawal. It comes from positioning, and that distinction changes everything. Not all silence is equal. Some silence creates pressure. Some silence creates respect. And some silence quietly destroys your authority. The difference is not What you say it is why you are quiet. Rule 4. Emotional silence is weak. Strategic silence is power. Emotional silence comes from fear. Strategic silence comes from control. They look similar on the surface, but they feel completely different to everyone around you. Emotional silence avoids conflict. It waits to be noticed. It hopes someone else will decide the outcome. Strategic silence observes conflict. It lets others expose themselves. It decides when to engage. People can sense this instinctively, even if they cannot explain it. When your silence is emotional, your body gives it away. Your posture closes. Your breathing shortens. Your eyes look away too quickly. That silence feels small, and small silence invites pressure, not respect. But strategic silence does the opposite. It stays open. It stays grounded. It does not rush to escape the moment. It is not hiding, it is watching. This is why some people can say nothing and still feel dominant. They are not silent because they are unsure. They are silent because they are deciding. Machiavelli warned against withdrawing emotionally from power struggles. Not because emotion is weakness, but because uncontrolled emotion reveals position. Silence should never be an emotional reaction. It should be a deliberate pause. A pause that says, I am not affected. I am assessing. Here's a simple self-test. Ask yourself this in the moment. Are you quiet because you are calm, or because you are afraid of what happens if you speak? If it is fear, silence will cost you authority, because power never hides. It waits in plain sight. But once your silence becomes strategic, something changes. People stop pushing. They stop filling the space as aggressively, because they do not know where you stand, and uncertainty makes people careful. This shift becomes even more powerful in groups, because groups amplify psychological signals, and silence inside a group does not just affect one person, it reshapes the entire dynamic. That's where silence stops being a personal tactic and becomes a social weapon. Silence multiplies in groups. What feels subtle, one-on-one, becomes powerful when more people are watching, because groups do not just listen, they observe reactions, and silence controls reactions faster than words ever could. Rule 5. Silence controls groups faster than individuals in a group. Attention becomes a currency. Everyone is subconsciously tracking who speaks freely, who gets interrupted, who does not need to fight for the floor. The quiet person who remains composed instantly stands out, not because they demand attention, but because they do not need it. And need is the fastest way to lose status in a group. Groups are sensitive to hierarchy. They look for signals of authority, so they know where to align. Silence provides that signal when it's calm, and deliberate when a quiet person reacts last. The group waits when a quiet person holds eye contact. Others adjust. When a quiet person does not laugh, does not nod, does not rush to agree, the energy shifts. People begin reading them as a reference point, not consciously, instinctively. This is why in meetings, one person's silence can shut down side conversations, not because they said anything, but because everyone is watching how they respond. Groups do not follow the loudest voice. They follow the most stable presence. Silence creates that stability. It slows the group's emotional tempo, and whoever controls tempo controls direction. Another important detail: silence works best in groups when it's consistent. If you are loud one moment and silent the next, the group cannot place you. But when your restraint is steady, it becomes predictable, and predictability creates trust. People trust what feels grounded. That trust becomes influence. This is where Machiavellian power quietly forms. Asterisk, you let others compete. You let others speak. You let others expose motives. And by staying silent, you allow the hierarchy to organize itself around you. But there's a moment when silence is tested. Someone challenges it. Someone provokes. Someone tries to pull you into reaction. That's the moment where silence either collapses or becomes a weapon, because how you handle confrontation defines whether silence protects you or strips you of authority. And most people fail that moment without realizing its silence becomes dangerous in confrontation. When someone provokes, most people rush to respond. They argue, defend, or explain themselves. And in doing so, they give up control. But the silent person does something different. Rule 6. Silence in confrontation is a weapon. They do not react emotionally. They do not justify. They hold their ground. And suddenly, the other person is exposed. Anger needs an audience. Words need a reaction. Silence with presence removes both. The provocateur begins talking to fill the void. They reveal their intentions. They admit things they did not mean to, and you do not say a word. This is why powerful silence is so feared even without threats, because it forces the other person to negotiate with themselves. They start questioning every word they have said, every move they have made. Your silence becomes a mirror, and the reflection makes them uncomfortable. The key here is calmness. If your silence is jittery or defensive, it loses impact. The mind reads hesitation, and hesitation invites attack. But calm, controlled silence communicates authority effortlessly. It is not aggression. It is observation. An observation wins more battles than volume ever could. Most people fail this test because they mistake silence for inaction. They think staying quiet is passive. It is not. It is active control. The real power comes when you break silence deliberately, just once. A single word, a sentence, and the room or your opponent bends to it, because they have been building tension in their own mind. And now, finally, they hear your response. They feel it. And it carries weight far beyond the words themselves. But before you speak, you must ensure your silence has done its work. Too soon, and the tension isn't built. Too late, and you appear reactive. Timing and calm observation make your single word unforgettable. This is the rule most people never learn. Words spoken without silence behind them are weak. Silence without words is wasted. The true master balances both, and that balance is what transforms quiet presence into fearless influence. When silence reaches its peak, words become weapons. The quiet person rarely speaks, but when they do, everyone notices. Rule 7. Speak once and redefine the room. This is not about delivering a speech. It is about precision. One carefully chosen sentence can outweigh 10 minutes of chatter. Scarcity creates value. Your words become rare commodities. They carry weight because the room has been waiting for them. Timing is everything. You have already let others reveal themselves. You have observed their weaknesses, their tendencies, their assumptions. And now you speak not to compete, but to reframe the room. Short sentences, calm tone, minimal explanation, You do not justify, you declare. You do not argue, you position. When you speak like this, the room listens differently. They stop reacting impulsively. They start considering their words carefully, because your silence has conditioned them to. Most people fail here. They talk too much. They try to convince. They over-explain. Asterisk, and every word reduces authority. The quiet person speaks once, and everything changes. People remember the quiet one who finally speaks. They replay the moment. They internalize it. They align with it. This is how silence and speech combine to control, influence. But even the strongest, silent strategy can crumble. People make mistakes. They misunderstand signals. They assume control is about absence of words rather than the deliberate placement of words. The difference between dominance and weakness is often one word. One pause, one carefully measured response. And that is why understanding silent mistakes is crucial, because the wrong silence or the wrong word can destroy authority. Instantly, even silence can fail. Not every quiet person commands attention. Not every observer becomes a master of influence. Rule 8. Silent mistakes that destroy power. Some stay silent too long. They retreat from the moment instead of shaping it. They avoid confrontation when presence is required. Others speak too soon. They try to reclaim control with words that carry no weight. They explain, justify, or argue, and in doing so, hand power away. Some silence is fear disguised as discipline. They hope staying quiet will protect them. It does not. It isolates them. It diminishes them. Asterisk. The difference between weak silence and powerful silence is awareness. Powerful silence is deliberate. It observes. It waits. It reacts only when it amplifies influence. Weak silence is passive. It hides. It hopes. It reacts because it cannot act. Most people confuse the two, and in groups these mistakes are amplified. A weak silent person becomes invisible. A strategic silent person becomes the axis of the room. There's a subtle but crucial rule. Weak silence begs for engagement. Strong silence forces engagement on your terms. The quiet person who misreads the room loses respect. The one who times, observes, and positions remains untouchable. And that distinction determines who rises in influence and who fades into irrelevance. Some people should never rely solely on silence, not because it is weak, but because they lack the presence to sustain it. Using silence incorrectly can make you appear indecisive, fearful, or powerless. But when done correctly, silence becomes a weapon far sharper than words. It controls perception. It manipulates timing. It turns rooms into stages where others perform, while you remain the orchestrator, and mastering this skill separates those who are quietly powerful from those who are quietly forgotten. Not everyone is built for silent power. It is not a skill you mimic. It is a skill you cultivate. It requires awareness, patience, and self-discipline. The room listens most carefully to the person who does not need to speak. Not the loudest voice, not the most dramatic presence, but the one whose silence carries intention. Some silence commands fear. Some commands respect. Some simply leaves others unsure, and uncertainty always benefits the silent. Mastery of silence begins with self-awareness. Ask yourself, am I quiet because I am calculating? Or am I quiet because I am afraid? If it is calculation, you control perception. If it is fear, perception controls you. Silence paired with timing, presence, and strategic words makes you untouchable. It reshapes the room. It alters hierarchies. It decides who speaks, who reacts, and who yields. This is Machiavelli's timeless principle. Power does not announce itself. It does not seek approval. It lets others feel it and react to it. And now you know the difference between weak silence and controlling silence. Use it, observe, wait, and when the moment comes, speak deliberately once, and the room will remember. If this changed the way you see power, reflect on it. Notice how silence can shift dynamics in your own life. The quietest people often hold the strongest influence. Power does not shout. It waits, it watches, and it decides. The room listens most carefully to the person who does not need to speak.